My husband vanished 2 years ago. Or at least, that is what everyone told me happened. I remember the morning the police came to my door. It was early, just past 6, and I was still in my robe, holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold. 2 officers stood on my porch with careful faces, the kind of faces people make when they are about to say something they have rehearsed. They told me my husband Richard's car had been found on the shoulder of Route 9, engine still running, door open, no sign of him. They told me these things can sometimes have explanations. They told me not to worry yet. I worried. For 18 months I worried. I filed reports. I called hospitals in 3 states. I sat across from a detective named Harris, who had kind eyes and no answers. I buried an empty casket at Riverside Memorial when the courts finally declared Richard legally dead because his mother was 81 years old and needed somewhere to put her grief. I stood at that grave in the November wind and told myself that whatever had happened to my husband, he was at peace now. I believed that for 7 more months, until last Tuesday, when I saw him buying peaches at a farmer's market in Asheville, North Carolina. Let me tell you who I am first, so you understand what kind of woman was standing in that market aisle. My name is Margaret. I am 63 years old. I taught 5th grade for 31 years at Clover Hill Elementary in Roanoke, Virginia. I know how to be patient. I know how to stay calm when everything around me is chaos, because 28 10-year-olds in one room will teach you that faster than anything else in this world. I raised 2 children, kept a house, sat with my mother through her final year, and built what I believed was a good and honest life, alongside a man I had known since I was 24 years old. Richard and I met at a friend's cookout in the summer of 1986. He was tall and funny, and he laughed too loud at his own jokes, and I loved him for it. We married the following spring. We had our daughter first, then our son 4 years later. We built our life brick by brick the way people do, slowly, imperfectly, always together. Or so I thought. The morning Richard disappeared, we had eaten breakfast together. Scrambled eggs. He had kissed me on the cheek before he left for work. I had called after him to remember we needed milk. He had said, "I know, I know." The front door closed. That was the last time I saw my husband for 2 years, 2 months, and 11 days. The market in Asheville was my daughter's idea. I had driven down to visit her for the week, mostly because she worried about me living alone, and partly because I needed to be somewhere that did not feel like the house where Richard had once kissed me goodbye. She had a Saturday morning routine coffee, then the farmer's market on Lexington Avenue, then brunch at a place she liked 2 blocks over. I had come along because the September air was cool, and I wanted something ordinary to hold on to. I was looking at a display of late-season tomatoes when I saw him. He was standing 15 feet away with his back half-turned to me, holding a paper bag and examining the peaches in the basket in front of him with the same focused, slightly frowning expression he always used when he was deciding whether fruit was ripe enough, 37 years of marriage. And I knew that expression the way I knew my own handwriting. I knew the way he held his shoulders. I knew the particular way he turned his head. My hand went numb. The tomato I was holding dropped and rolled off the table, and I did not notice until a young man picked it up and tried to hand it back to me, and I was not able to speak. The man at the peach stand turned slightly to reach for another piece of fruit, and I saw his face. It was Richard. Not someone who looked like Richard. Not a stranger, with similar features. My husband. The man I had shared a bed with for 37 years. The man whose dry cleaning I had picked up every Thursday. The man whose name was carved into an empty grave marker at Riverside Memorial. He was standing in a farmer's market in North Carolina in a blue linen shirt I had never seen before, looking healthy and unhurried and completely, utterly alive. I do not know how long I stood there. long enough that my daughter came around the corner looking for me and found me motionless between the tomatoes and the herb bundles, with my hand pressed flat against my sternum, as if I were trying to keep my heart inside my body. "Mom, what's wrong?" I could not answer her. I just pointed. My daughter looked. She looked back at me. She looked again at the man by the peaches. I watched the color leave her face, the way water drains out of a glass. That's not she started, but it was. We both knew it was. Richard had already moved on from the peaches. He was walking toward the bread table, relaxed and easy, the paper bag hanging from one hand. He had not seen us. I watched him pause at the sourdough loaves, pick one up, check the bottom the way he always checked the bottom of bread loaves at home, and set it back down. Every gesture was so familiar it felt like being cut. My daughter grabbed my arm. She was shaking. "Mom, what do we do?" I had been a fifth-grade teacher for 31 years. I had broken up fights, talked children through panic attacks, delivered hard news to parents, and stayed standing through all of it. But in that moment, between the bread table and the tomato display in a September farmer's market, I had no idea what to do. So I did what I had always done in my classroom when something frightened me. I breathed. I thought. And then I acted. I followed him. I told my daughter to stay where she was, and I walked after my husband through the market, keeping enough distance that he would not see me if he turned around. He stopped at a honey stand. He chatted briefly with the woman selling jam. He was unhurried. He was comfortable. He knew this market. He was a regular here. He walked to the parking area at the end of the block and got into a gray Honda I had never seen. I stood at the edge of the sidewalk and memorized the license plate. Then I went back to find my daughter. She was sitting on a bench near the entrance, with both hands pressed together in her lap, staring at the ground. When she saw my face, she stood up immediately. "Did you talk to him?" "No." "Mom?" "I got his license plate." She stared at me. I think she expected me to be falling apart. I understood the expectation. I had spent 18 months falling apart. I had cried in parking lots and grocery stores and once in the middle of a school supply aisle because Richard had always insisted on buying the children brand name crayons instead of the generic ones. I had done my falling apart. I was finished with it. "We need to go back to your place," I said. "And then I need to make some phone calls." We did not go to brunch. We drove back to my daughter's apartment, and I sat at her kitchen table with a notepad and I wrote down everything I had just seen. The blue linen shirt, the paper bag, the gray Honda, the license plate number, the honey stand, the woman selling jam. Every detail I could pull out of the last 20 minutes, because I had learned from 31 years of teaching that when something important happens, you write it down immediately before memory starts to soften the edges. My daughter sat across from me and watched me write, and then she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." I put down my pen. She took a long breath and looked at her hands and said, "I didn't know about any of this. I want you to believe that I didn't know he was here, but I knew he wasn't dead." The kitchen was very quiet. "Tell me," I said. "She had found out 8 months ago," she said. Our son had called her. He had told her that their father had contacted him, that Richard was alive and well and living in North Carolina, and that he had left because he and here my daughter stopped and pressed her lips together, and then continued because he said he had been unhappy for years and did not know how to say so, and had simply decided to start over. He had asked our son to keep it quiet. He had asked our son not to tell me, and our son had agreed. And then, 8 months later, our son had told his sister, who had also kept quiet. I sat with that for a long moment. The coffee maker on the counter made a small sound. Outside, someone was mowing a lawn. "How long," I said, "were you planning to keep this from me?" My daughter started to cry. She said she had not known what to do. She said she had been afraid of hurting me. She said she had argued with her brother about it for months. She said she was sorry. She was so sorry. She had almost called me a dozen times. I listened to all of it. I did not cry. I thought about the empty casket at Riverside Memorial. I thought about the detective named Harris, with the kind eyes. I thought about Richard's mother, who had died 4 months ago, who had gone to her grave believing her son was dead, who had never gotten to know the truth. I thought about all the nights I had sat in my living room in Roanoke, talking to a photograph on the mantel. Then I picked up my phone and called Detective Harris. He answered on the second ring. He remembered me. I told him what I had seen and what my daughter had just told me. I read him the license plate number. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Mrs. Margaret, I need you to stay where you are and not approach your husband. Can you do that for me?" I said I could. What I did not tell Detective Harris was that I had already decided I was going to do one thing before he arrived, the following morning. Before Detective Harris and 2 Asheville officers came to my daughter's apartment to take my statement, I went back to the farmer's market. I had learned from my daughter, who had known for 8 months, that Richard often went on Saturday mornings. I stood near the bread table at 9 o'clock, and I waited. He came at 9:15. Same relaxed walk, same unhurried ease. He was alone this time. I let him get close enough that turning away would have been impossible, and then I said his name. He stopped as if he had walked into glass. For a long moment we just looked at each other. He had aged. There were more lines around his eyes than I remembered. His hair was almost completely gray now. He looked, I thought, like a man who had not found whatever it was he had gone looking for. "Margaret," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I buried an empty box for you," I said. "Your mother died thinking you were dead. Your children kept your secret for 8 months, and you are standing here buying bread." He opened his mouth. "I don't want an explanation," I said. "I have called the police. There are legal matters to address, because a court declared you dead, and because the insurance settlement that I received and used to pay off the house has now become considerably complicated. You are going to need a lawyer." He stared at me. "I also want you to know," I said, "that I am not going to spend one more day being afraid of what happened to you. I know what happened to you. You chose this. That is something you are going to have to carry for the rest of your life, and it has nothing to do with me anymore." I turned around and walked back to my daughter's car. My hands were shaking. I will not pretend they were not. But I walked in a straight line, and I did not look back once. The legal process that followed was not simple. It rarely is. Richard had to appear before a court to have his death declaration reversed. The insurance company was notified, and the settlement became the subject of proceedings I will not fully understand until my lawyer explains them to me again next month for the 4th time. Richard's reappearance was reported in the Roanoke paper and then picked up briefly by a wire service, which meant that for about 2 weeks I received phone calls from people I had not spoken to in years. My son drove to Roanoke and sat across from me at my kitchen table and apologized for 40 minutes. He cried. He told me he had felt trapped. He told me he had convinced himself it was kinder not to tell me. I listened to all of it, the way I had listened to my daughter, the way I had listened to Richard at the farmer's market. And then I told my son the same thing I have had to say to myself every morning since that Tuesday in September. The kindest thing is always the truth. The rest is just fear dressed up as protection. I do not speak to Richard. We are in contact only through our lawyers, which is how I prefer it. He is still in Asheville. He has, as far as I know, not started the new life he left to find, or if he has, it has not brought him the peace he imagined. My daughter calls me every Sunday. My son calls on Wednesdays, and we are working, slowly, on the distance between us. Some bridges can be repaired. I believe that one can be, eventually, because he is my child, and I know the difference between cowardice and cruelty, even when the results look the same from the outside. I am still in the house in Roanoke. I painted the living room a color called sea glass green, which Richard would never have agreed to. I joined a watercolor class on Thursday evenings at the community center. I have 3 African violets on the kitchen windowsill that I am determined not to kill. I am, for the first time in as long as I can remember, sleeping through the night. People ask me how I am doing, and they ask it carefully, the way people ask when they are braced for a complicated answer. I tell them the truth. I am doing better than I have in years. Not because of what happened, not because of the resolution, or the legal proceedings, or the conversation at the farmer's market that I have replayed more times than I can count. Because I discovered something that 2 years of grief could not teach me. I do it every September, when new children come through the door and nothing is familiar yet and everything is still possible. I am doing that now, and this time I intend to get it exactly right.